I have to remember to drink like 4 of those a day. So.
What's in there?
Just water.
Good for you.
Oh no, I don't drink that.
It's just water, but
You got a little vodka in there, we'll be all set.
I'm not gonna
How
check
you get
that
through a
out.
reading? You
I'm not gonna check that out.
That's why it's,
I'll just take your
can't see
word.
through it.
Huh?
I'll just take your word.
Okay, good. Take my word for it.
What does she think?
Oh. Housing commission.
Another resignation.
Just to remind you of,
I knew Leo wanted to. He's in his
I
names.
just forget his name.
Leo retired.
I see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that should have been in the packet. This was the new one to add.
Yeah, I didn't know, I just was told to remind you.
Thank you.
Oh, that's too bad. How old is he though? Isn't he in his 90s?
What'd you say?
Is Leo in his 90s?
Yeah, I'm sure he is.
That's a long time.
Why is he resigning?
In 90s.
I've known Leo.
He goes, I mean, his commission, I think, was done at the end of this year, so.
The house, is that what you're thinking, housing?
Oh, she was asking about Leo.
Oh, okay, because I was gonna say he goes till 2026.
No,
Leo goes until 2023.
I thought his was on there until the end of 23, it showed.
For the housing?
Yes. Only till the end of 23. So you're, I mean, this person can be finished this year and then have 3 years or whatever.
I always love these. Okay.
Dennis seems like a nice guy.
Yes.
Are we ready? Everybody's set?
We're all here.
As long as we're all here. I'm not gonna use that because you don't hear me. So, the meeting now will come to order, 6:15. Thank you for your patience on that. We had the special meeting at 5, so it went a little longer than what we should have, so it's appreciated. Okay, roll call.
Ms. Howe?
Here.
Ms. Butler Challenger here. Ms. Wilson?
Here.
Mr. Benzie?
Here.
Mr. Funes Bliss?
Here.
Ms. Kellerman?
Here.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Here.
Thank you.
Item 2, for those that are following it, civil reflection, pledge of allegiance, and moment of silence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay. We have item 3, which is approval of the agenda, although I'd like to add an item to that.
What changes would you like to make, Madam Chairman?
Thank you, appreciate that. I would like to make an addition to the committee appointments.
What number is
We
it?
have that would be
11.
11 committee appointments. We have a resignation, which I was sorry to take, but did, for today, which made it very close. And so, to take his place would be Dennis Lardy. And Dennis is here tonight if there's any questions that the board may have for sitting on the Housing Commission.
So you're adding that to
So I'm
11C?
adding to the committee appointments would be a resignation from Leo, you guys, you always.
Gallegos.
Gallegos, thank you. To replace by, or to take the place of Dennis Lardy.
Okay,
Do we know the expiring term?
And he, according to what our sheet says, Dennis will take this.
And Leo expires 12/31 of '23.
Of 23.
So are we going to
So-
want just to have him finish that term?
Dennis will finish that term, and then he'll have to be reappointed.
any other changes?
Is there anything else that needs to be changed?
I have a question, on section 13B, letter E. Yep, it says update emergency sirens for the north section. We don't have any information to go over. I talked to Kevin Douglas today. He is collecting information still, so I don't know how we can do an action.
There has to be an action as to whether or not you accept the north end or not. That's the
Well, don't we
action.
want the information to see if we can afford it
That's-
first?
That's afforded?
Well,
Seriously?
I'm just
Okay.
asking. I'm like, what kind of
Yes,
action are you asking for?
I'm asking for an up or down as soon as I give you an update.
Okay.
So that's what that means. So
But you don't have no estimate?
do I have an estimate on it? No.
Then
I'm
why
just
do we
giving you-
even consider it? Why don't we just move it till next meeting?
Because you need an update as to what's happening with it.
We were
And
just
that's
told.
Kevin Douglas.
No,
He'll bring that
that's part of-
information.
That's part of what Kevin hasn't been in touch, and I haven't been in touch with him. So I don't know what he's,
Because I talked to him
I don't
today
know.
and he
Okay.
has information, so
Okay,
he's
what
still
if-
collecting some and
so what information does he have?
he doesn't have it all collected to bring to
No,
us,
What did
so
he tell you?
that's not my job. That's his job. He's collecting the information.
Okay, I'm still gonna give you an update, and I would like to have an action of accepting or rejecting. Yeah.
This does involve money,
Always involves money.
yeah, but we should have a number that we're voting on
So we can
Yes.
review it.
before we can
Did you
review
have,
it.
well, should I ask the question, did you have money numbers for the other 4 sirens?
And, it's just saying, this involves money, there should be a number with it if I'm gonna
Okay.
approve it.
Well, then we'll move it to introduction, so that you have introduction and discussion. If that's what you want, because I have an update.
Well, you can give your update, we don't have to vote on it.
That's what I said, so we'll move it.
Because she has it under action items.
I
Because it is
understand
under
that.
action.
So-
So that would become C?
It
It
would be
becomes-
C,
13 AC?
so it would be 13AC.
Yep.
So we're looking to Kevin for cost of the siren, okay. Okay, any other changes?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as amended,
Is there any other suggestions for changes?
not that I
Okay.
see.
I
Oh,
do.
you have one?
At the last meeting, I think Cheryl was gonna bring something about the senior center.
Right, and maybe I need to add this here. I was 2 hours late I had a death in the family, to get the suggestions to Karen, so they were beyond the deadline of Wednesday. So I don't know if I can add this in there to have the senior center open more hours, whether we want to put it under items for action. Certainly, I would like it to be discussed
Okay, so we're gonna keep that in there then?
somewhere,
Did
yeah.
you, I mean, it's under items for introduction and discussion.
I know, I guess.
So we need to discuss it. Okay, because you didn't, there's
Right,
no
because
information provided to us
No.
for us to even make a vote or.
No, we
talk-
can't
yeah,
vote. We
so
can
there's
talk
no-
more about it.
Okay.
Okay.
Did you bring information? Because we could get it copied still.
No.
Oh, okay.
So do you want to do that today or
I,
should we?
I
move
would
it
like to
2
get
weeks?
information more than give it, if that makes sense.
Would you like to discuss that with me?
Discuss it,
Thank you.
yes, okay, we can do that.
So 13,
Okay.
unfinished business, capital A, small a will stay the same. Is that, you wanted for information and discussion, correct? Okay, is there any other, anybody else asking?
I second Joe's motion.
Then the motion has been made to accept the agenda, and it's been seconded.
With the changes?
Where are the changes?
With changes, thank you.
Ms. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Benzi?
Yes,
Ms. Kellerman?
Yes.
Mr. Funes Bliss?
Yes.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Yes.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Hopefully you can hear now. Item 4, disclosure of conflict of interest. Doesn't seem to be any at this point. Item 5, public statements. Keep changing this. You got to do the, thank you, Judy, got it going?
She hasn't started talking yet.
Good evening. My name's Judy Gardy, and I live on Park Lake Road, and I just would like to make a comment about the senior center. I think when we have emergencies like we've had the last few weeks with this smoke, we ought to have a provision, whether it's at the senior center or somewhere in the community, where people can go to escape the smoke, and I'd be happy for the plan to include the senior center. Thank you.
Judy? Judy? The plan?
A plan.
Oh, a plan, thank you. I was going to say.
There
is
should be a plan.
Okay,
There
nope, I
should be.
gotcha.
Dennis Lardy, Coleman Road, Bath Township. I am also in favor of having the senior center open for 5 days. I, for one, do not have air conditioning in my home, and someone said, well, get in your car and drive around. I do not have air conditioning in my car either. It's wonderful for you people that can afford that, but I don't have either one of those. As far as I heard that Karen had mentioned something about $30,000 to keep it open 5 days. Totally ridiculous. We have discussed this in our senior services advisory board meetings. We're all willing to donate our time to keep it open. You don't have to have a paid person in that time. If we've got responsible people on boards that are willing to do it for free, then I see no reason why we shouldn't be able to have it open. And we don't have to pay someone $30,000 plus benefits.
Thank you, Dennis. Is there anybody else? No takers? You come on, I was going to say, Meg, you're sitting back there.
And nobody else has got it. I would just like Meg Ritchie, Outer Drive, and along those same lines of having the senior center open, there was comments made last meeting about, well, we can't have it open because we've rented it to these individuals or these groups. Well, would they have to rent it if it was open? They wouldn't need to rent it if it was open. But skipping forward, another item that I had brought to the township's attention was that there is not an emergency landing spot or an emergency place for people to go. And I brought this up to you after the last tragedy at MSU. And thinking, well, where are we supposed to go if there's an emergency or the power goes out or it's wintertime? You can't stay home, or you need to find your family, or just an emergency spot. And I think the senior center, if it had a generator, would be an excellent spot or an idea, or as Judy says, maybe in coordination with.
That's great.
I also, after notifying Bath Charter Township, I was told to call the 211 number. Well, I called the 211 number, and they told me that our emergency station, landing spot, gathering, was the Bath Township Library. Well, the library didn't have any idea about what I was talking about, and I don't think they have a generator. Does anybody know that?
The director would.
No. So that's just something maybe while you're considering Ms. Kellerman's notes later that you could.
I have more to say on all that.
Right. Right.
I promise.
But it's just another thing to consider before you can start planning up the budget. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank
No, I
you.
think you're good. Thanks, Meg. Okay, is there anybody else? I know there's a head back there, but I don't know whose head that belongs to.
Jason Elmery.
Oh, it's Jason. Jason, do you have any public comment? All I can see is just the forehead.
I have lots, but I'll reserve them. He has a big forehead.
Okay. Whatever. All right, so item 6, do we have anybody here from the county, state, or federal, or any other? Doesn't seem like it, so we'll say there are none at this time, other than Southern Clinton County, which is, we're gonna go ahead and ask Director to give us a briefing on it.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor, Trustees. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the 2024 SCUMA budget. And I'll be happy to go through any questions you may have related to that document, which I believe you all have received. I know it's a lengthy document, so I apologize for that.
Supposed to be.
But related to Bath Township in general, if you go to page 7, that would highlight the costs associated with Bath Township. The 2024 budget does have an increase projected of 8.5% total. Overall, Bath is seeing about a 7% total. And the difference in that is that the combination of different accounts. Each individual municipality pays portions to the plant and their own collection system, so that's the little discrepancy there. As you'll see highlighted on page 7 in that center section, this does include the payments back, which would be highlighted as bond payments. That's the perceived projected cost associated with the SRF funds that we are using to develop the project will be started yet this month at the plant. Again, that's a $23.6 million project. This will be the first major upgrades to the SCUMA plant since its original design back in 1980. This overall project will increase the capacity from 5 million to 6 million. That share will help benefit Bath. Currently, Bath sits with approximately 550 RUs left in its capacity. Going to 6 million at the finishing of the project will bring you up to around 1,355, give or take. That fluctuates a little bit every year depending on flows related to usage within the township. So don't hold that number to the exact number, it fluctuates a little bit. But the impacts to the major increases to the budget are related to a lot of the commodities that we use. So our facility uses 3 chemicals in its process, and that's where we're seeing the most significant increase, nearly 70% increase over last year. These costs continue to increase. I'm hopeful that we're starting to see a little bit of a plateau here. We were getting increases about monthly. Now we're at about a 6-month period, so that's calming down a bit. The good news with the project, we will be eliminating 2 of those chemicals moving forward. Of course, it's going to take some time to get these new processes in place. The overall schedule is for 3 years of construction, hopefully to get them done in a little over 2. The other costs associated with standard operating, like you folks also see in your township, healthcare increases. Right now, those numbers are coming in double-digit increases for many of the municipalities, so we plan for that. And also relative cost to salary moving forward. Other than that, everything's pretty stagnant. The MERS payments continue to increase as there's been a couple of bad years in the market. That has impacts to the actuarial, which we did receive, and our funding level did go down a little bit, even though we continue to pay extra, but we're still in a comfortable spot. Other than that, you'll see that everything else is pretty stagnant in numbers. Those would hit the highlights of the overall plant operations. Is there any questions or comments as you breeze through it?
The budget increase that we have is how much compared to what it was a year ago, or the last time you presented your budget?
Typically, we've seen anywhere from 0.5% to 2.5%.
Okay.
So it's quite significant. There's no doubt about that. Again, a large portion of that is the processed chemicals, as you see if you go through. On page, excuse me real quick, I'll get that for you.
I was gonna say.
If you look at page 21, and ultimately 23, you'll see, 23 gives you the processed chemicals.
Right.
There's $75,000 increase alone in just processed chemicals. That's significant. That's a large portion of what this increase is.
But that's not our portion alone, is it?
No,
Or is it?
no, that's
Thank you.
divided up for each
That's-
municipality. So
That's
that
for the
being a
total.
201 being a process number, Bath are responsible for 2024, 28.2% of that.
So that's what our increase would be, which would 28.2, or?
No, that's how much you pay in total process costs.
That's what okay.
Your the overall budget for, Bath is 7% increase.
So that's not 35% then? If we have a 7, okay, let's, let me make sure. the
Chemicals.
numbers.
When it comes to dollars, it's 7% for Bath
Yeah.
over last year, yes.
Okay. Now, you talk about a 5-year plan, or at least that's the information.
Yep,
we're
5-year
given.
CIP, yep,
Yep, but you're talking 3 years to complete this project.
yep.
So what happens in the other 2 years? Is that just kind of the kinks out of it?
Yeah, so our CIP
Okay.
continues, so we have a 30-year CIP that we developed through
Right.
SCUMA, and we fund that through reserves, so part of your payments, when you look at, that page 7, you'll see equipment repair and replace reserves.
Right.
That portion's for 201 and 200, that's what's being reserved in that CIP. The CIP replaces items, that are ongoing wear items, and other individual pumps, clarifier mechanisms, digester components, all things related to ongoing maintenance and replacement. That's what the CIP is for, it's just our internal, plan upgrades.
So in 3 years, we finish the project. In 2 years, we maintain, basically.
We maintain every year,
Well, that's what I
including the
thought.
project, yep.
Okay.
So the project's kinda outside of that. The CIP stuff is stuff that we're gonna be doing alongside the project.
Okay.
The
got it.
project is bigger than those CIP items.
Cool. You are always so good.
No.
Thank you.
Happy to answer questions,
That's,
glad to have them.
all right, is there any other questions that anybody might have? Thank you ever so much.
Absolutely. Thank
Greatly
you.
appreciated. Okay, consent agenda, item 7. Is there a motion to accept it?
I so move.
Second,
Mr. Benzi?
yes.
Ms. Kellerman?
Yes.
Mr. Funes Bliss?
Yes.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Yes.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes.
Ms. Wilson?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Our item 8, those that are following, is approval of the minutes. I'm assuming that's minutes for the Board of Trustees.
Yes. I make a motion to approve the minutes as submitted for the Board of Trustee meeting, June 20th, 2023.
Second.
Ms. Kellerman?
Yes.
Mr. Funes Bliss?
Yes.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Yes.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes.
Ms. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Benzi?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, item 9 is approval of the vouchers.
I'll make a motion to approve the July 17th, 2023 vouchers as presented.
Second,
Mr. Funes Bliss?
Yes.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Yes.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes.
Ms. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Benzi?
Yes.
Ms. Kellerman?
Yes.
Thank you.
Item 10, Treasurer's Report. Okay, it looks like A, so the Control and Efficiency Vulnerability Assessment. What a name.
Succinct, it is not. Thank you, Taylor. All right, so I am here this evening. My name is Bethany Verbal. I am from Maynard Casterison. I'm the senior manager in our consulting division. So I, over the past couple of months, have been working with the township staff and have put together the Control and Efficiency Vulnerability Assessment. So really, the point of this is twofold. One, do we have the strongest internal controls that we can? Are the funds of the township secure? The other side of things is, are we doing things in the most effective and efficient manner? So if we have really, really great internal controls, but something has to go through 16 different people to be approved, that's probably not the most efficient methodology. So what can we look at, what can we do to make sure that what we're doing is both safe and secure as well as efficient? So that is the focus of this report / presentation. Taylor, could you flip to the next slide? Thank you. So any presentation or any report like this starts with the fraud triangle. You've probably heard of this. It's one of my favorite things, but I think I might be in the minority there. So anytime you have fraud, and more importantly, anytime we're looking at internal controls, because we want to prevent fraud, we start with the fraud triangle. So the fraud triangle says there's going to be 3 elements in fraud. There's going to be pressure, perceived financial need, you might have heard of it, rationalization, someone has to be able to rationalize that what they're doing isn't wrong, and there has to be opportunity. Opportunity is where, both from an efficiency, but really from an internal control standpoint, is where we can do everything that we can to protect the township, stop fraud sort of in its tracks. Opportunity is when there is inadequate internal controls, so that if someone is feeling some pressure and can rationalize that what they're doing isn't wrong, if they have that opportunity, then we have a situation ripe for fraud. So a lot of what this is focused on is how can we reduce any sort of opportunity for someone to do something perhaps they had not to. So before I get into specific recommendations, I just want to, this is a very unique report for the township, right? It's not your annual audit report. I'm not going to tell you about any of the GASBs, I promise. This report is recommendations. These are best practices specifically tailored for the township. That doesn't mean that you have to implement every single one of these things. You might decide, once you go through an assessment, that that doesn't make the best sense for the township. Everything in this is best practices, recommendations for the township, but you have to assess them as you go through. And one of the things that we have in here to help is sort of a visualization. And that's really the most important part of the presentation. And we have 2 of them. It's divided into 2 sections, control and efficiency. So, and Taylor, could you switch? Thank you. You read my mind. So the first one we have is the control matrix, focusing on internal controls. And what this matrix says is every single one of our recommendations is good. I'm not going to put it in the report if I don't think it's valuable. But I think some of them are going to be more impactful to the township than others. So I don't want us to focus on a really, really easy one that we can put in place that doesn't really provide us a lot of value first. I want us to focus on where can we have the greatest impact. So that's what you can see on this matrix. And we start with the likelihood. So that doesn't mean that fraud's happening, but it means what is the likelihood that fraud could happen if we don't implement this. So we start with remote, and as you go along, we end up with probable. So if it's over here towards probable, we're going to want to address that sooner than later. But we also want to look at the side, potential impact. So if it's negligible, like if it happened, it's not great, but it's not going to cause the downfall of the township. If we're up in extreme, I'm not saying it's causing the downfall of the township, but we're gonna have a big problem that we need to address. So if we have something that is all the way at the top and all the way over to the right, we wanna look at that first. If it's all the way down in that left-hand corner, we can get to it, it's a good recommendation, but it's probably not where we wanna have our first focus. So as we're going through some of the overall recommendations, this is really to guide where we want our focus to be on. So, next slide, please. Control recommendations. So again, these are all related to internal controls. First one, positive pay. So we'll talk about this later, but one of the recommendations is, we have a lot of opportunities now to leverage technology. We don't have to write paper checks for everything. I would actually tell you that that's less secure. We have seen a significant increase in check fraud because of mobile deposit, and it's really easy for me to white out who recipients are. When you make ACH payments, it's a heck of a lot harder to do that, but we'll get to that. So starting with positive pay. Anything that we write a check for, positive pay is a really great way to add additional controls. It's typically done with your financial institution. You send them a list of checks that you have written. Recipients, amounts, all of that. If that check that someone tries to cash is not on that list, the bank's not gonna cash it. So it's not perfect. I've still seen check fraud happen with positive pay, but it is a good way to add another layer of control over our payments. Dual control over electronic
Could I
payments.
ask,
Yes, of course.
do you want us to interrupt or do you want us to wait?
Interrupt me.
Is positive pay better than reverse positive pay?
Yes.
Why?
So when I think of reverse positive pay, I'm thinking something has already happened and we're looking at it afterwards. You're thinking of something different.
Reverse positive pay is where the bank sends you a list saying, here's the checks that were presented. We'll pay them at 5 o'clock unless we hear otherwise from you.
So I always like the control being in our hands.
Right.
As opposed to the bank telling us, because, and this is sort of a human error thing, it's really easy to get a list from the bank, look through quick and say, yeah, that looks fine. If we are sending them our check register, we've already done all of that side of things. We've already gone through and said, yeah, we're cool with all of these.
Got it.
Both are good controls. I just have preference.
That's helpful, thanks.
And yes, I should have said, please interrupt me if you have questions as I'm going through.
Will we get the full report at some point?
I will defer.
Bethany will be providing the final document to us.
Okay.
And then Karen will have it. I'm not sure how she plans on distributing it, so that would be a question for her.
Okay, thanks.
So electronic payments. I love dual controls because then one person can't do anything that perhaps they shouldn't. So any electronic payments that we make, we want to make sure we have dual controls over it. That is as simple as going through your financial institution, any ACHs or EFTs. We have a policy, we have it set up with our bank that it requires 2 people to authorize. So one person puts it in and says, yes, I approve this. The other person gets a notification and says, yes, I approve this, or no, why are we paying this? Dual controls. Vendor onboarding process. One of the easiest ways to commit fraud, if one were so inclined, would be to create a fake vendor and put that into our system. So letters C and D actually both address this concern. So the vendor onboarding process, we want to make it so we have to have adequate documentation when we're putting a new vendor in. So someone can't just say, hey, here's this new vendor, and come to find out it's actually their side business. So if we require W-9s, if we require conflict of interest assessments, that locks that process down. We can also design workflows so that all of this vendor onboarding, all of the approval of that is done electronically. Then it's stored in the system. We have a really great paper trail. It still follows our document retention policy. So that's the vendor onboarding process. Vendor auditing. So not saying we want to do this all the time, annual basis, biannual. This is something we do for a number of our clients. We basically will get your vendor listing and do data analytics over it. So are there vendors that are close to each other in name, but they aren't exactly the same? I've seen literally one letter changed with the one letter changed, it was somebody's side business, not the legitimate vendor. When I'm looking at checks, I don't necessarily look at the individual spelling of each vendor. So having this auditing process helps us identify anything that might have slipped through our current process. So that's something we recommend on a periodic basis doing. So credit cards. Credit cards make me a little bit twitchy, I won't lie. That is the technical term. So credit cards. We want to limit the number. That doesn't mean none. I completely agree that credit cards are often necessary for the operation of a business. But we want to do an assessment. And only the people that absolutely need a credit card should have one. And sometimes that is changing a mentality. A lot of times the mentality is, if I have a credit card, it means that my organization trusts me. That's not the mentality that we want to have. Having a credit card, I hate to say it, isn't really about trust. It should be about, do you need it or not? Exactly. So if we have that mentality, then we can change it and say it's not about trust. It's not about your position within the organization. It's, do you actually need a credit card? Because if not, why have it? So not saying none, but saying we want to do an assessment. Who has credit cards? We know that. Does everyone that has them need them? Looking at our general use credit cards, we do sometimes see an increased risk of fraud anytime we have general use credit cards. You guys have them locked up pretty good, so someone's going to have to work pretty darn hard to get to one. But again, something to assess. Do we want to have general use credit cards? Do we have the level of control in place that we feel comfortable having those? And again, not something you're required to do, but looking at restricting credit card vendors. So different credit card companies will allow different things, but if it is an option with your credit card company, assessing, okay, so if our chief of police have a credit card, does he need to be able to make purchases at the hardware store? Maybe. Maybe someone is borrowing his credit card for the use of the department. Maybe not. So doing that assessment, saying, does that control make sense within our township? Next slide, thank you. So payroll processing. I know this is something we've discussed a lot internally, so I'm excited about this. But so the way the township currently does payroll, we're essentially paying someone on Thursday for Friday that they haven't quite worked. This is a legacy system. You guys are not alone in this, so don't feel like you are. You guys are doing absolutely the right thing and saying, hey, this doesn't quite make sense. We should probably change it. So that's one of our recommendations. Already, been working with the clerk and the treasurer and the superintendent's office to kind of start making that change while still being respectful of employees and all of that. So great job already working on that, you guys. The pay rate process. So one of the things that we always want to have locked down, because it's one of the most important things for our staff, is what is the pay rate process? How do we communicate raises? How do we communicate if there's not going to be any changes? Who makes that decision? So ultimately, the board is responsible for the budget. Typically, unless someone is hired directly by the budget, so chief of police, your superintendent, their pay rate would be handled by their department head. That is general practice. So just making sure that that's documented. That will be another theme of this evening. I love documentation. It's great. Because if we have a documented process, procedure, policy, then we know exactly what we are expected to do. We know what we need to do. So having that documented. There was some question on election workers. I've seen it a variety of different ways. Technically speaking, election workers should be on payroll. They've currently been paid through AP. Again, you are not alone in that at all. But from an IRS standpoint, I would suggest switching them over to payroll, and that's something the clerk has already started looking at for our upcoming election cycles.
You're saying we're not taking out federal income tax for them as staff members?
Yes. Which, for the most part, it doesn't really matter, because they're not getting paid enough for there to be any impact on income taxes. That said, with the additional, 9 days of early voting, that has the potential to be a little bit more impactful. And then vehicle stipends, currently being paid via general disbursement, again, very common. IRS rules would say we should probably move that over to payroll. So that is something that, again, the clerk's office has been moving towards. So no major concerns there.
Would that be the same for, I know we give, cell phone reimbursements?
Yes, but I believe, unless I'm incorrect, that those are currently paid through payroll.
Cell phone is currently paid through AP. You said it wasn't a large enough dollar amount to worry about changing them over to payroll. We can revisit that.
I'm gonna make a note.
Okay.
I just want to double check on that.
Yep.
I agree that it's not a large enough dollar amount, but,
Okay, thanks.
okay. Great question. L, so our front office job duties, you guys already have a really, really great breakdown of what each person is responsible for. Just formalizing it in a cash handling process. Again, I love documentation. Then we know exactly what each person is responsible for. And we do provide recommended templates for any processes or policies that we recommend. Looking at M, so just doing a periodic review of accounting and banking system access. Sometimes, we have turnover, we have people that move into a role and move out of a role. So making sure on a periodic basis, we're checking who has access. Do all the right people have access? Do people that don't need access, have they been removed? So doing that on a periodic basis, again, just to lock things down. Thank you. N, annual cybersecurity reviews and training. You guys already have a great cybersecurity vendor, so just making sure that we're doing kind of an annual review, and we're also doing annual training. So cyber criminals are a lot smarter than I am, unfortunately, and they change every single year, so making sure that we are keeping our staff informed of what issues that are out there, things that they need to look for, so doing that annual training.
Is this why we all got the new training? Okay.
See, already on it. Travel
Wait, oh,
policy.
Who got training?
We all got sent an email to do training.
Okay,
Because it's cyber.
You have to do the
Yeah.
training through the email.
okay. Nope. Thank you.
Or on the computer.
For the travel expense policy, we do already have a section in the personnel manual. I would just suggest breaking that out, and for lack of a more precise term, beefing it up a little bit. So we have provided some recommended changes to that policy as well. Conflict of interest policy. So this is not to say that the board does not have any sort of conflict of interest policy, but it's not readily apparent. So really documenting and putting into place a conflict of interest policy. Again, we've provided recommended. I will also tell you, it's not to say you can't, but especially with this policy, that conflict of interest item on your agenda, that does not need to be there every meeting. That is something that the board does on an annual basis, and if something changes, as you would read in the policy, it is each board member's responsibility to alert the board. You can leave it if you want, just something to keep in mind. Fraud risk management policy. This is something very few organizations have, so it's probably my most frequent recommendation. And it feels a little bit silly that I'm telling you to have a policy that says don't commit fraud. But it's actually a really great idea, because what the policy does is it not only says don't commit fraud, but it also describes different types of fraud. Now, it's not exhaustive, and the policy says that, but if someone perhaps has a different definition of what I do about what is or is not fraud, then we have an explicit description of what the township considers fraud. It also lays out what people should be doing if they have concerns. So a fraud risk management policy, you can separate out a whistleblower policy. You can also combine them. But so it provides people a method of, okay, you tell me to report concerns to my supervisor. What if my concern's about my supervisor? Who do I go to next? So that policy really lays out for anyone that might have concerns what the chain of command, the chain of reporting is. Oh, yes.
In what you're describing, your fraud risk management policy, would that also include our committees, boards, and commissions?
It
So
involves.
it would be the whole
Yes.
package? Thank you.
It includes vendors, contractors, anyone who is elected, employed, or in some way involved with the township is required to follow that.
That's a great idea.
So if anybody we pay through payroll needs to sign this
Yes.
policy. Thank you.
Credit card use policy. So again, I love documentation. So having an explicit policy that details out exactly what everyone is allowed to, or not rather, who is allowed to have a credit card, who assigns it, who approves it, what happens if your card gets lost, what happens if you make poor choices and you put personal expenses on the credit card. All of that is explicitly laid out in that policy. I would also suggest that the township explore credit card options that have rewards points with them. And within the policy, you can also, and with the example we've provided, it explains who is responsible for redeeming those points, what we will use the points for, basically detailing all the controls over those as well, because they are essentially cash to the township. So we should absolutely take advantage of the benefit, but we gotta be smart about it.
I thought we had a credit card policy.
So you do, I have suggestions to beef it up.
Got it.
All right. Password policy. This is something a lot of organizations are working towards implementing, basically establishing a baseline requirement for your passwords. So it can't be 123, it can't be your name plus 123. What are the requirements of the township? So we've included a sample policy in here. Our IT folks internally have provided that recommendation. So if it makes you feel better, we have to follow it too. But again, protecting electronic resources. Looking at monthly reporting. So one of the things that we recommend, the treasurer is currently providing a quarterly treasurer's report, which is exactly what is required. I would suggest, though, monthly reports of revenue and expenditures compared to budget. That does not necessarily come from the treasurer's office. That is kind of depending on where it makes the most sense to come from. It could come from the clerk's office, it might make sense from the treasurer's, it might from the superintendent's. But regardless of who is actually responsible for putting those out, I would recommend reviewing those on a monthly basis. U is talking about board member training. So at a minimum, on an annual basis, we recommend that the board receive training. And there are a number of different organizations, including Maynard, that can do training. MTA is I know a big one for governance. But you guys have an important job. So making sure that you're aware of changes in legislation, of changes in accounting standards, of trends that are happening across the state, best practices, and it's difficult to get that information if we're not getting that training. So at least annual, we recommend that for the board. Reinstating the finance committee. So this is something that, and it looks like approximately 2016, sort of disbanded isn't the right term, but that's what I'm going to use. So I would suggest considering re-implementing the finance committee. The goal, as with any committee, is that the majority of the work takes place within the committee. The committee then brings the recommendation to the board. So typically what you would see the finance committee take on is reviewing the proposed budget, looking at financial reports, overseeing the audit, reviewing management of the township debt, risk management policies. All of that would happen within the finance committee, who brings the recommendation to the board. So that is something that we suggest. We also provide a recommendation for typical members within the committee who would typically be responsible for nominating anyone. Yes.
When you talk about your finance committee, what is your suggestion for the number of individuals with the finance committee? Is there
3 to 4?
2, 4, 5, 6, 8?
It can't be 4 though, otherwise it's a board meeting.
That's not all bad.
Well, except
You
it
mean open to
excludes
the
the other
public?
3 people. No, not public,
Okay.
it's a board meeting. We all can do action if 4
No,
of us are in a room
I
together.
understand that, But if you only have one or two in a finance committee,
You should have more than two.
yeah, I guess that's.
So in general, what I would suggest, superintendent, who is not technically a member of the board.
Correct.
The treasurer, the clerk, and potentially an additional member. You may not need an additional member. But that is what I would typically suggest. Those are the people that are going to be most heavily involved in finance, who are going to have the most knowledge and be able to make the best recommendation to the full board. You are not required to have a finance committee, so if that is not what works for the board, then, again, this is a recommendation. But generally speaking, I see that work best for the finance committee to frankly do the groundwork. Investment policy, we already have an investment policy, but I had some suggestions just to, again, beef it up, improve it. You guys all know the township is pretty heavily restricted in what you can invest in, and the language updates on a periodic basis, so really making sure we have all those requirements. And then federal policies and procedures, and again, you are not alone in this, but any time an organization accepts a single dollar of federal funding, they are required to have specific federal policies and procedures. A lot of what is required is already covered in what the township has. Not all of it is. And best practice from the feds is that you have a policy for each of the compliance requirements, whether or not it applies to the grants that you have. Because maybe you'll get a different grant, and they want to know that you'll be able to handle it if you get it. So we've provided templates for all of those requirements. That wraps up internal controls. Other questions before we talk about efficiency?
The only question I had was, in going back before we knew we could interrupt you, to say, what are the letters that are on your control
Oh, I'm
matrix?
sorry. Yes.
No,
So the letters.
those may
within-
already know.
The letters within the control matrix correspond to each individual recommendation.
That's what,
So then you can
I'm
tell.
glad you know, because that's good.
That way you can tell what I want you to focus on first and what we can look
Okay.
at, but maybe not tomorrow.
So M, for example, being extreme is a 12. Is that what you're,
Oh, you
It's
have
the
wrong
other
graph.
matrix.
no, that's what I'm,
And then go
good.
down, page
That's what I'm looking at, is the letters.
So M,
I got it.
so without, and that's where we have to determine what I refer to as risk appetite. How do we feel about risk?
I
Yeah.
think she's misunderstanding the numbers versus the letters. Is that
Oh.
right, Marie?
No, I'm not misunderstanding. What I'm asking is, what does the M stand for?
M goes with M.
Oh,
One
Marie.
goes with
So
one.
if you go further on each, like
That's-
T is monthly reporting, is you've got the highest
All
right-hand
right,
upper
Sorry, I just
corner.
don't want you to
That's-
get too
that's
far
your-
down the road.
So T, monthly reporting is the most
So
dangerous
the
place.
code that you use is, sorry about that, is obviously what you have in here. So your M is going to equal whatever.
Whatever M is right here.
Yes, so
Okay.
M specifically is accounting and bank system access review. So
Yeah,
it's important, but it's not likely to have a huge impact. So we should look at it, but not tomorrow.
got it. Thank you.
Yes. So now when we flip to efficiency, it's gonna be the exact same thing, but, so we don't get confused, it's numbers instead of letters.
Correct.
Good question. All right, so starting with one, we talked about this in the internal control section, but looking at increasing our ACH transactions. They are secure, they are an effective method of payment. Your vendors are also gonna get paid a heck of a lot faster, because we're not sending things in the post office and then the post office loses it, or the vendor gets it and it gets lost in AP. I know I'm preaching to everyone who knows what I'm talking about. But so increasing our usage of ACH transactions. BS&A, your accounting software, is set up incredibly well to accommodate those. And you will find that is probably one of the tenets of my efficiency recommendations. Use your software. You guys already pay for it. It has a lot of functionality and bells and whistles that we can use. I haven't come across a single municipality that uses every single aspect of BS&A, so let's use what we can. 2 is kind of along the same line. So
Right.
we're doing weekly check processing, and that's super common. I would also say if we're doing ACH transactions and things are moving faster, we probably don't need to do it weekly, which is a lot more efficient because we're doing larger things all at once. We're not having to pick up, put down. looking at our expense reimbursement and credit card management. So look at potentially using an expense reimbursement software. This is also something which you can loop in with your credit cards. So right now, people are turning in their expense reimbursements and their receipts and their credit card statements. If they forgot a receipt for the expense reimbursement, then we have to go hunt them down. If they forgot a receipt for the credit card, we have to go hunt them down. Then they ignore us, and we still have to hunt them, and we're playing this back and forth game. When we have a software like this, it is the cardholder, the employee requesting reimbursement, whatever it is their responsibility to take a picture of the receipt. It is attached to the record. They will tell us what it is for, which if the software is set up correctly, which we can help with, will also automatically code it to the appropriate general ledger account. So we're not playing this game of, well, what did you buy this for? Well, I bought it for this. Okay, well, I'm gonna put it in this line item. Well, no, that's not the budget line item I wanted it to. So you're putting more of the responsibility on the cardholder or the person requesting reimbursement, not just for fun, but because they actually know what the purpose of that purchase was. So it's saving time for everyone.
We still gotta hunt them down a lot.
Yes, I'm not saying the hunting completely goes away, but then it's on them. Looking at our credit limits. So right now, policy limits cardholders to $1,000 a month. For some people, that might make sense. For some people, that might be really low. It might be really low for 1 month, next month that's perfectly fine. So what I typically suggest is just having a blanket total credit limit for the township, $20,000, whatever the board decides. It could be more, it could be less, again, depending on what need is. And then each person is assigned a credit limit, and we have more flexibility that way. So if someone needs a $5,000 credit limit 1 month, but the rest of the time they need $500, then we can allocate that limit, instead of calling the bank every time something changes slightly.
You recommend that's done by need and not by power?
As far as, oh, I get what you're saying, yes. So I don't care who's holding the card. If they need $5,000 1 month and that is an approved expenditure, perfect.
Yeah. Thanks.
Again, with the software, looking at integrating our credit card situation or our credit card software with BSNA, we're doing a lot of hand entering and hand coding right now. Super common. Not the best use of anyone's time, right? So looking at the ways that we can integrate some of those systems, it's rarely a perfect integration where we have one entry in credit cards and it goes perfectly into BSNA, but there are usually very good exports from good credit card and expense reimbursement softwares that make it a lot easier to import into our accounting software. And then looking at our time card review process, and this is where I say we have to look at both internal controls and efficiency. Right now, your internal controls, I have no quibble with, but there are about 4 different people looking at time cards. We probably don't need 4 people looking at time cards. We need their department head, and we need the check signers. So if we can eliminate where someone doesn't need to review something, where it doesn't provide value, and we're still keeping fantastic internal controls, but we're eliminating moving of paper around. Thank you. Looking at the electronic payroll review process. So right now, again, very common. We're printing payroll registers, we're approving that, and then we have to retain that for documentation. All of that can be done in our accounting software. I actually like the accounting software approvals a heck of a lot more, because if we're approving something on paper, it's really easy for anyone that wants to write their initials and the date. If you're in the accounting software approving something, it is attached to your name. So it is login stamped, time stamped, date stamped. So unless someone has hacked your BSNA system, in which case we have a very different problem, it's going to be a lot easier for someone to essentially forge approvals. So looking at getting our our payroll process approval done electronically. Time cards, and actually I'll kind of loop 8 and 9 together. We still have some people that are filling out physical time cards. I know that that's a comfort. I also know that it's a lot of extra work for anyone who's processing payroll. So anyone that is still filling out paper time cards, we need to move them over to electronic. We already have a good system in place, let's get them there. Similar with physical payroll checks, it is a lot of additional work for the payroll processor. It also can make our bank reconciliations a lot more difficult when people perhaps have not cashed their payroll check within a timely manner. It needs to be a blanket policy within the township that we pay via direct deposit. We give people adequate time to provide that information. It eliminates the additional work on the payroll side of things. We're making our bank reconciliation faster. We're processing things a lot more efficiently.
Can I go back?
Yeah.
When you talked about the time card review process, that it's very, very good at what we do, what do we do with our time cards? How do we do that?
So you currently have 4 people that essentially review it.
Okay,
The deputy superintendent, the department head, your clerk, and your treasurer. I have no objection to 4 people reviewing things.
Oh, no.
It's also completely unnecessary.
in doing that, all they're reviewing is the numbers that are there. They're not reviewing that they actually were there or what they did.
That is the responsibility of the department head.
Gotcha.
So I
Okay.
don't suggest removing the department head from the process. But yes,
Okay. No, thank you, because I kind of wondered that when you said it was really good. It was like, how do we know that?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Human resource files, those can be done electronically too. PSNA, your accounting software that you already paid for, actually has an entire human resources module. So looking at moving those files electronically, and again, that does still fulfill any record retention requirements. Board committee payroll. So board committee members are getting paid via payroll. Awesome. If someone's getting paid via payroll though, we do have to have any of the required payroll forms. So anyone that does not have that complete file with the forms, we want to make sure that we get those filled out from them and get that information uploaded. Number 12 is something that you guys are already work in progress, so great job. Just looking at our employee handbook, I think you all know that there were some things in there that we needed to update. So I agree with that, great job. That's 12. Looking at our check deposit process. So during tax time, we're going to the bank a lot, right? Because we've got a whole bunch of checks coming in. So one of the things that we might want to look at doing is getting a check scanner from the bank.
Oh, that's a thought.
So basically what it is it's a scanner that sits on your desk, you feed the check through, it scans the check, it deposits it. So then the only thing that you are having to actually physically go to the bank for is any cash payments that are received.
Okay.
Quarterly budget amendments. So we want to make sure that we're amending our budget on a quarterly basis. We also want to make sure that it is getting updated within the accounting software for any of those amendments. The accounting software should be our source. So whatever is the most up-to-date, whatever is the most accurate, that is what should live in the accounting software. So again, making sure we're doing those, and that will also help inform the monthly reporting that we're doing. Strategic plan, this is tough. We need one. So whether it is something that the board does internally, truthfully, I suggest getting an external consultant to assist with strategic planning. I've seen people try and do it internally. It's rarely as effective as having an independent third party who can come in and ask those hard questions. But we absolutely should have a strategic plan. Not a 10-year strategic plan typically, because I don't know what it's gonna look like in 10 years, and I don't think any of us do. But typically a 3 to 5 year strategic plan.
Okay.
It's a lot of work, but it's also incredibly valuable for the township. Record retention policy, you guys are following the state of Michigan retention policy, but just having that essentially implemented as one of the township's policies. And keep in mind, with the record retention policy, that does not mean that we have to store everything for 7 years in paper. Please don't do that. If it's in the computer system, you guys already have a great backup system with your IT vendor that is completely sufficient for record retention policy. capital requirements. Capital asset policy, we don't have a formal capital asset policy. So we have provided a recommended policy for that, just making sure that we implement that. That policy essentially details out what's our capitalization threshold. I think for you all it's $5,000, so just documenting that. If it's something that we're gonna use for over 1 year and it's more than $5,000, we're gonna capitalize it. If it's not, then we're not going to. That policy will also help clarify the question that I hear a lot is, okay, well, I bought 10 computers and in total that's $6,000. Well, do I capitalize that or not? Well, that's gonna be in your policy. So it's also going to tell us what our requirements for disposing of property is. So all of those requirements over capital assets. I would also suggest doing periodic capital asset additions. So this is more within the offices, but looking at quarterly perhaps, what assets did we add? Because what we usually do is at the end of the year, we go, oh boy, we did a whole bunch of stuff, and now we have to go try and find the invoices, and it's a lot of work. If we're doing it periodically throughout the year, it's a lot easier at year end. And then looking at some of our purchasing and bid policies, so we have one. I have some suggestions for it. Right now, the last one that we have was last approved in 2015. Prices have changed a little bit since then. The township has changed since then. So right now, anything under $1,000 requires a reasonable best price, perfect. Anything between $1,000 and $10,000 requires 3 written quotes, and anything over $10,000 requires a sealed bid. That is a very low policy. The board can absolutely maintain that. I wouldn't recommend it, because you're doing a lot of work for $10,000, which for your budget feels significant, but it's really not. So kind of as a board determining what's our risk appetite, where do we feel comfortable? I will tell you federal guidelines tell you that unless something is $150,000 or more, you are not required to have sealed bids. Between $3,000 and $150,000, you are required to have 3 quotes, but no sealed bid process until $150,000. That's federal requirements. Some municipalities follow that. Some 150,000 feels pretty high. But again, that is something that within the board, you can discuss where are we comfortable. So those are our recommendations. Questions for me? Yes.
One statement. It sounds like you put a lot of time into this.
Well, I also, and I always forget to do this before I started, the township team put a heck of a lot of time into this too.
Yeah.
And
That's no doubt.
the clerk, the treasurer, the superintendent, the deputy, everyone within the front office, this is a lot of work, because what I do is I come in and I ask you, what do you do? Tell me everything. Tell me daily, tell me weekly, tell me monthly, tell me annually, tell me that like weird thing you do every 5 years that you kind of forget about but is really important. Everyone reviewed this in fantastic detail. So I am very excited for the township. I think this is a very viable report. You guys are already excited about implementing some of the things, have already started on it. So it was a lot of work, but it was also really valuable and fun work. So thank you for that.
Thank you for all your hard work.
Yes. Other questions? And then follow up on the cell phones.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was the only question.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for your time this evening, and I am, of course, available for any questions that people might have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.
All right, under Treasurer's Report, 10, we go to capital B, General Fund Investment Report.
I just have it included in there for you to look at if you have any questions in regards to it.
Oh, no explanation, just a review? Okay, FYI?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Do we know what we're looking at?
Same thing you've looked at for the last couple of years.
Right, well, no, the numbers are different. So we're looking at all our banks that we have and what our investments are, is that
Correct.
correct? Gotcha, thank you. Okay, number 11, committee appointments, that's mine. So I have an appointment here for consideration for the board for a Terrence McMillan. I don't see Terrence.
He's not here, but
not.
I've met him
Yeah,
quite a
I
bit.
don't
He's
see him here. He
Not
is a
easier.
very busy man, to say the least, which you usually apply to somebody who's busy. You give them something else to do, and they can do it. Yes,
We need to accept the resignation of Terry first.
well, I'm getting, oh, we have to do that first?
Yeah, that's how it is on
Well, I know, but I didn't know, because Terry's
Can't appoint
resignation had
somebody
already
until you
been,
have a
but she'd
resignation.
already, but you saw this, okay. Terry Wood, who had been with us for a long time with the Housing Commission, has sent in her resignation, so I guess we have to accept or reject, correct? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I'll move
Okay.
acceptance of the resignation of Commissioner Terry Wood from the Housing Commission as of July 1, 2023.
Second.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Yes.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes,
Ms. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Benzi?
Yes.
Ms. Kellerman?
Yes.
Mr. Funes Bliss?
Yes.
Thank you.
now we can talk about Terrence. So he's the one that's going to be taking the place from Terry Wood, who apparently, you've got the sheet there, is 2026. So Terrence will be there, his term will expire 12/31 of 2026.
Okay.
So do I have, I'll make that motion to accept Terrence McMillan to the Housing Commission for a term expiring 12/31 of 26, replacing Terry Wood.
Second.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes,
Ms. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Benzi?
Yes.
Ms. Kellerman?
Yes.
Mr. Funes Bliss?
Yes.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
a late addition, which would be Dennis Lardy, who will be taking legal,
Resignation first. You gotta do the.
I'm just explaining it,
Okay.
you know, and we can do it, so Dennis, you'll know. The resignation from Leo Gallegos.
Gallegos.
Gallegos, thank you. I do that to Leo all the time, he laughs at me. So we're looking for the resignation to be accepted from Leo, which was today. In fact, I didn't find out until today. You have a copy of it.
I move we accept Leo's resignation.
Second.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Yes.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes,
Ms. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Benzi?
Yes.
Ms. Kellerman?
Yes.
Mr. Funes Bliss?
Yes.
Thank you.
all right. Dennis, who's sitting in the audience, has graciously accepted that position, which according to what our clerk has, I'm not sure, when was that the latest? Because I don't have the latest.
6/21 of 2023.
Okay, that I don't have. So the next one to update, can I have a copy of it?
Certainly.
Not sent to my email, but
Yes,
printed?
printed for you.
Thank you.
Yes, I can do that.
That's appreciated. So if there's any questions for Dennis, please feel free. He's sitting right in the front row there. Are there any questions? Okay,
I do have a question.
go ahead.
Dennis, it says here to assist in the accounting as treasurer. There's really, it just says members, so is there a difference between the member and a treasurer over there?
What I was told is that I would be a member, a voting member of the commission, but then as a treasurer, my main responsibility is to be the second signature on the checks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I assume they make him treasurer.
Yes.
Well, that's kind of like other committees that do that. Yeah.
Thanks.
Do we get a second? I make the motion to accept it, but do we have-
Second.
Okay. You guys can arm wrestle. Okay. Okay.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes.
Ms. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Benzi?
Yes.
Ms. Kellerman?
Yes.
Mr. Funes Bliss?
Yes.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Yes.
Thank you.
That is a congratulations. That's a tough duty, to say the least. It's, all right. Item 12, Township Committee Reports, Safe Route to School. I'm assuming that's Jason, who's sitting. Oh, no.
Elise.
Elise, thank you.
All right, I'm Elise Erickson. I'm the Safe Routes to School Coordinator, and this is just going to be an update for what we have done so far. We've really started to roll out the program by attending events within our community. Thank you, Friends of Park Lake, for inviting us to the Summer Solstice event. You can go ahead.
Oh, okay,
whenever.
sorry. I didn't know when you wanted me to go.
We were able to promote our program by creating a scavenger hunt for the kids and giving out prizes with our brand on it. We were also able to, wanted to thank all the volunteers that came out and helped out during our bike rodeo, which is that event right there. And we could not have done it without them, so a special thank you, Cheryl, for coming out and hanging out with the Safe Routes to School that Saturday. It's great to see
It was
the
a great
township.
job. You guys did such a job. That was great.
So we had about 30 kids and 40 adults participate in the event. The Bath Myers and Costco both gave donations. Myers gave 2 bikes, helmets, and tire pumps, and they were raffled off to the community, and water and snacks were from Costco. We received 2 additional bikes from a community member that were also raffled off. And then a thanks goes to MSU Bike Service Center, Tim Potter, who let us borrow bikes and helmets from his business in town for the event, and that allowed many kids who could not bring their own bikes to borrow and be able to go through the program.
Good.
It was great seeing some of the local lifelong bicyclists within our volunteer bunch sharing their passions with the families that came through. And then the story walk was debuted during the event at the bike rodeo, and we are still figuring out the process as far as logistics on where they are going to be stored, as well as figuring out when the schedule for them to come out and be put away for. And then we were approved for Safe Routes to School mini grant proposal for the Bath Elementary, Middle School, and the high school. And that'll be awarded funding for the 2023-2024 fiscal year for the amount of $44,590. And then we have a few events scheduled for the rest of the summer. We'll be hosting a mini training for kids, and that'll be August 13th from 3 to 4 p.m., and that's going to be after the back-to-school event, which is going to be hosted by the Methodist Church. And then we are also planning to make an appearance at the farmers market. And then finally, we have scheduled our next crossing guard and walking bus training event for August 17th at 1 p.m. at the library. So we'll be ready to start the walking bus and support the crossing guards start of the school year. That's all I've got. Any questions?
It was great. Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you.